today I'm going to show you this. I think it's a very, very useful usability uh, item to have on a website. So a lot of our websites, we have a way to log in, and we keep that with session state. And I'll talk about session state in a little bit. But it's a way to make sure that each user is within a session, and whatever they do within that session is essentially blocked off. And so the hack we're going to show today is when that session expires, meaning that when the session is time is about to end, you want to give the user some way, some notification in case they've got the browser up, they're logged in, but maybe they're on a different tab, or maybe they're just doing something else. And so this is a way to let the user know, hey, your session is about to time out on this browser. Do you want to take action? Do you want to do something? Do you want to stay logged in? Do you want me to just time you out automatically? And so that's exactly what we're going to do today. And you've probably seen this type of feature on your bank website. So you're checking your banking accounts, you're checking, how much money and funds you have, and then after about 5 minutes of being away, the bank will pop up and say, oh, hey, listen, you've logged in. This is not good for your security, so we're going to log you out. Unless you meant to stay in, and if you did, just click this button to say, yes, keep me logged in, or just log me right back out. So it's kind of easy to do in one aspect of it. There's a couple of pages to add in terms of warning them, but where the magic really happens is in the JavaScript. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this, and I'll go through this. I hope it's not too daunting, but one of the things, if it's not become clear yet, is this is fast becoming even in ASP.NET or any web development, a very JavaScript-oriented world, meaning that if you don't know it yet, if you're not comfortable with it, get comfortable with it. And in all honesty, my JavaScript kung fu is actually not that great. And I rely on some experts in our company, for example, Julian. If you go to DevExpress.com/ I think it's just Julian, you'll find he's always talking one way or another. If he's not talking about Delphi, he's most likely talking about some aspect of JavaScript, and he's got all sorts of webinars on learning JavaScript. And my team itself, the ASP.NET team, has some amazing JavaScript geniuses. And so today they've actually written something quite interesting here. So we're going to go through all that in just a minute. So let's just start off. The goal of this webinar isn't to really go through and make a version of a site that has login and session state, because there's a lot of ways to do that. And so I'm going to leave that choice up to you. Instead, let's just make a little site and enable session state on it so you get the idea. So I'm just going to make a website, actually. You can make a project or a website. I'll make an empty one, and I will call it session warning message or something. And I just like to start by a default website because it's clean. You get to see exactly step by step what gets added. All right, so while that's loading up, let me show you. If you have not seen, there's a couple of blog posts related to this, and we'll definitely add these to the links. You can find them by just going to devexpress.com/mehul, which redirects to my my blog, and just do a search for how to show a pop-up warning before session timeout. Now, this works both in WebForms and ASP.NET MVC. And for MVC, we have an actual sample you can download, and I'll show this a little bit later on. I'm going to show you the WebForms version just because it's a little bit faster to get through, and there's a lot to talk about. So let us get started. So here's our empty website, and we're going to start by just adding a new item to it, and that's going to be a default page. By the way, Visual Studio has a lot of templates in here. If you ever have trouble finding something, just start typing in here. So we're looking for a web form, and if you type that, I think it's let's just do web. And I think that narrows down the results. And here's the web form in C# and Visual Basic. And let's just click Add because it's got the default ASPX name already to it. Okay, so in the default page, we want to show a little message. Now let me just bring up a little something here. So in the default ASPX page, we're just going to talk a little bit that, hey, this is a session timeout and what that session timeout is going to be. So I'm going to add a little paragraph here. And I'll do the lazy way to close that and simply let the user know that a timeout warning pop-up will be shown every, X number of minutes. Let's just call it minutes. And X really just represents the session timeout. So let's go first add that, and then we'll come back and actually define this, because this can be a variable amount. So to do that, we will go to our web config. And in the web config, right now this is an empty website, so it's very blank. But once we start adding our DevExpress controls and so forth, you'll see references start showing up in here and so forth. So where does the session state exactly go? So to do that, well, I've got session state open here, but let's just do a quick, choose the engine of your choice. Google seems to work pretty good. So I'll say session state, and it brings up the first result for MSDN, and this is correct. However, well, let's just first see what it does. As it says, it configures a session state for the current application. So the website or the web project or whatever web application, ASP.NET web application you're making, when you define this element inside of the web config, it tells that web application that, hey, every user that joined is now part of a session, that the items within that session are unique to that user. So it's a great way to control user-specific settings, data, et cetera, et cetera. So this MSDN page talks about it. However, this is framework 1.1, so let's make sure we use the latest one. Now, the thing that I mostly care about is timeout. As you can see, there's a ton of options that they've added over the versions. And if we look at timeout, it said it's an optional time span attribute. You can set it up to, I think, almost a year, which is kind of a long session in my opinion, and it's not a good idea. I would avoid really long sessions because sessions are costly. They don't come from free, meaning that they cost memory and CPU cycles. So I would be careful with how you use sessions and what you put inside of actually the session object, which, while it exists only for that session that the user's logged in, it's still memory on your web server. So you want to be careful in how we use it. So what we care about though right now for this sample is just a timeout. So the timeout defines how long that session is going to exist for. And the default, if we don't specify it, is simply 20 minutes. So I don't want to make you wait 20 minutes for an example, so I'm going to make it 1 minute. So let's do that. Now, oh, by the way, to figure out where exactly it goes, you just take a look at the very top, and it shows us that this is part of configuration, system web, and session state. So it goes under system web, and here's system web, so we can add it right after compilation. So if we start typing, here we get session state, and we'll set the timeout equal to 1 minute. All right, so now I'm just going to do a quick compile, make sure everything I've assumed so far is correct, and it is. And now let's go back here and simply tell our display that we meant to show the session timeout. So set this to session.timeout is equal to 1 minute. Now I'll explain this in just a second. Actually, let's go back. What I'm going to do for demo purposes, and by the way, don't worry about the sample. All of this is available in a Code Central sample, which I'll show you how to get at right after this. So the session timeout is set to 2 minutes, and for demo purposes, what it's essentially going to do is, after 1 minute, it's going to show the warning. And if nothing occurs after that 1 minute, because we're going to count down, we're going to show them after the last minute, we're going to say, oh, here's a pop-up that's going to display for 1 minute, and you have 1 minute to take action on it. And if you don't, hey, we're just going to log you right out. So let's do that. Now, let's define the thing that does all the magic. Now, I'm going to add a new item. And I'm going to call it, it's going to be a web user control. Now the web user control will allow us to encapsulate all of the items that we need to in terms of JavaScript, the pop-up itself, And we're going to be using a DevExpress pop-up control. We're going to be using a couple of other DevExpress non-visual controls for example, a callback, a global events control. So to do that, a user control just makes sense. And I'm going to call this the timeout control. Let's add this. Now, the first thing I want to do in the timeout control is actually add the pop-up control. So let's do that, and you can find that under the toolbox. Now, the very first time, if you don't open the toolbox, Visual Studio does a lot of things for performance, for example, delaying loading of many items and references and so forth. So sometimes when you first go to the toolbox, it's a little bit slow. And as you can see, it'll come back. I usually trust it to come back. Usually it doesn't disappoint me. So let's just give it a few seconds. All right, so while that's loading up, I'll go back here, and in this blog post is the reference to this Code Central sample, which you can also get to by typing devexpress.com/. You can actually just go to search. I think search might be an easy way, but as I said, the direct link is right there, which is E3302. Now we use those numbers because we have a lot of Code Central samples. All right, so let's see. Yeah. All right. So now this is back. Now, if we go down to, oops, I don't want the Server Explorer, I want the toolbox. If we go down and not under scheduling or reporting, but if you go into a DX11.1 navigation layout, you'll find the ASPX pop-up control. Now, when I double-click this, it's going to add a reference to the pop-up control here, but because this is our pop-up control, we also want, well, actually it added it to the top, so let's make sure it's in the right place. It also adds a bunch of things to the web config. So as you can see now, the web config has the assembly references that are necessary to use the pop-up control. Now, it's necessary for us to set up the pop-up control. Now, this pop-up control, you can use the pop-up control in a variety of ways. Now, to get some ideas, you can always go to demos.devexpress.com and go to the ASP Experience Suite. And under the pop-up control, you'll find all sorts of different ways to use the pop-up. You can embed it inside of another control. So let's say you wanted to use it so that, you know, when you clicked a button, it went and got some data. You can do that. So it has a lot of nice uses. In this example, we're actually going to use it like a pop-up in the old meaning where pop-up would just show up in the middle of a page. And because this is a general pop-up, but we do want to warn the user. So it's not necessarily going to be instantiated by any clicking of the user. In fact, we're going to do it based on a timer. So let's set up this pop-up control to look right. All right, so the first thing is, let's go to the design. I find it's just going to be a little easier. Now you can do this completely from the client side. So I'm going to click properties there. I'll click the pop-up control. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the ID. I'm going to call this timeout. Oops. Timeout pop-up. And I'm also going to give it a client instance name because I'm going to be referencing this. As you notice, there's a lot of things that we're going to be doing on the client side, so I need a reference to this on the client side. And generally, I'd just like to add the word client in front of whatever the current name is, which is timeout pop-up. So you know that this client object belongs to the server object called timeout pop-up. Next, I'm going to set the close action. So the close action is what action is going to cause this thing to close, meaning that sometimes a pop-up appears and a user clicks anywhere else, the pop-up will go away. Now you have different options, like you can do it on mouse out, where if it's you can mouse over something and then when you mouse out it disappears. I'm going to actually set that to none because we don't want this pop-up to go away unless a couple of specific actions that we desire occur. For example, one, they click the button, or the timer on the pop-up itself rolls down. By the way, you know what? I'm sorry if I didn't show you exactly, but this is exactly what we're building here. By the way, so you know, 1 minute had passed on this page. This pop-up showed up, and it told them, hey, your timeout, your session is about to end. And then we gave them a 1 minute, this 1 minute timer that says, okay, do something. And if, let's just say we only put one button here because essentially that's all they can do. They click OK, that's great. If not, just let the timeout run out, and then it'll redirect them to to another page. So we're going to build all that. Now, as for that, we don't need a close action. Next, let's set up the header text. Right now it just says header, so let's call it something more meaningful, like session expiring. And then let's set the modal property to true. Now modal essentially tells you, you'll find this under the behavior category, but modal tells the pop-up dialog that they have to address is the pop-up, meaning they can't click away from it and go back to the page. So it has focus essentially, while the other part of the website doesn't. So it's a very interesting concept. Comes from the good old Windows days where you know, modal pop-ups would take control and things can get crazy. So because this is the only pop-up, we don't have to worry that there'll be different modal pop-ups trying to fight for your attention. Next, we're going to set the alignment, the pop-up horizontal and vertical alignment. We'll find that, I believe, under appearance or under miscellaneous. So the horizontal alignment, you can set it to many different things. Now, if this pop-up was going to be based off of an element, I can say, hey, show this pop-up right next to the element that I clicked on. But this is going to be right in the middle. So I'm going to use Windows Center for horizontal and vertical alignment. Okay. Next, we're going to set the show close button. So the show close button you should find under, I believe it's under appearance, and we're going to set it, normally it's true. So we got this little button that allows them to close it, but I don't want that. I don't want them to be able to close it. I want them to address exactly the only thing that I give them on this pop-up, because that's the meaning of this pop-up, that, hey, I want your attention, please take some action because your session's almost gone. So we get rid of the show close button. Let's make sure we also, we're going to display the footer because we're going to add something to the footer here. So let's go to show footer and set that to true. Right now it says footer. Now I'm not going to set the footer text because I'm actually going to replace the template within that. And finally, I am going to allow dragging. So if they want to move the window around, they can, but because it's modal, they'll get the idea that, hey, I can't really do anything. I have to address this. So I kind of like that aspect of it, and I'll show why after we get this all wired up. So the next thing is we want to add some content here, and we're going to just type something here like your session is about to expire, and let's put in we're going to put in a countdown holder here, and this is actually the little countdown that we'll be doing in there, and I'm going to do that on the HTML side, and I'll show you why in just a minute. And then here's the instruction: click OK to continue your session, and that's it. So that's what we wanted to do, and then we're going to add a little button to the footer in just a minute. So first, let's go define the timer. So the timer obviously is going to have to be done dynamically on the client side. So we're going to have to do some JavaScript for that. So I'm going to use a span element, and I'm going to give it an ID so I can reference it when I'm using the countdown. So let's close off the tag, and let's call it countdown holder. Now, it's very important when you're doing client-side development with JavaScript stuff that you get the right name. So, for example, if you're going to be referencing this called countdown holder, you want to make sure that it is exactly the same name that you're going to be referencing a little bit later on. Otherwise, you know, you learn the headaches and joy of debugging JavaScript, which is, why isn't this working? Oh, because I was off by, for example, if you used 0 here, something like that, right? You'll find out that there's a lot of little issues. So it's better just to be aware the first time. Okay, so essentially now we've got our message. Now let's add our little item in the footer template. Oh, so another thing I want to make sure is let's set up the width. You can see that it's not wide enough, and I don't want my message to kind of get wrapped there. So let's set the width a little bit wider. Let's set it to 250 pixels. Okay, so that seems wide enough. I got my message in there. And now to edit the footer template, I'm going to go to the Smart tag from the design view. We'll click Edit Templates, and I'm going to select the footer template. Now you have different options here, the header, the window header, etc., etc. But the footer template is the one where I want to add something. So here, I'm going to add a little ASPX button. Now, let me make a quick side note here. Okay, you know, I should almost put up something in here that this is kind of like my if you've ever read newspapers, it's like my editorial. Nowadays, it's commonly referred to as rant. So I'm going to tell you my perspective. There's a lot of people who ask me, why do we have certain type of controls? So in here we have a button control. Now, what does this button control give you that a standard HTML input doesn't give you? Well, it gives you the ability to use our themes for one. So if you want to have a consistent look and feel and use something like our professionally designed themes, like our office themes or any of the fun themes that we have, it's going to be a little bit hard for you to style that yourself. Versus this is you add that to your page, you simply define it in the web config, or you define it in the Smart tag, and you have that nice look and feel. Now, it's also very customizable, so you can give it a bunch of different types of looks. You can use different types of buttons. And if you wanted to do something on the client side, we also provide a good client-side API for this button. But here's the thing, to do all this and to get cross-browser compatibility, it comes at a little bit of cost, meaning that we have to use a table to render this so that we can get all of those features in it. Now, if you don't need those features, don't use them. So for example, I don't really need to use a button here. I'm going to use it because I want to stay consistent with the demo that's online. But in case you don't need to, really, I'm going to make this button act like a client-side button. But when I decide, hey, I want the pop-up and I want this button to have a consistent look to the website that I've built that's already using a DevExpress theme, then the ASPX button is the way to go. Okay, so that is the end of my editorial there. Now, to stay consistent, I want to make sure I want to give it a meaningful name. So let's call it something like OK button, because this is the button that they will click. And of course, it should say OK. Now, because I said I'm going to make it act like a client-side button, I'm going to set auto post back to false. And we're going to define a client-side event on this. So when they click this button, we want an action to occur. And the action we want to occur is that the session stays live, that they're not automatically logged out. Okay, and so to do that, we're going to add a client-side event for the on-click of this button. And you can do this by going to the Smart tag, clicking client-side events. And here, I can actually define what's going to happen in here. But instead of doing that, I'm going to point this to another function that we're going to be defining, because I want to keep all my JavaScript together at the top of the page. So instead, I'm going to just say, hey, I'm going to call an object called session timeout, and it's going to have a method called send keep alive. So as you notice, I'm not doing any of this stuff just because it's actually calling that method, and you'll see that in just a little bit. All right, so now we can end template editing, and we've got our OK button. We've got our dialog pretty much set up. So now let's add the other items that we'll be using in this page. So I mentioned that there's a couple of other items that we're using to make sure that this page is able to talk to it. Now, to do this, we're going to use what's called the ASPX global events and ASPX callback control. So if we go to search.devexpress.com, now this is a little known object. You probably haven't seen it because generally we use this global, I can't spell global, but it's GLOBL events. And the first thing it'll probably do is bring up the help file for it. And so if we take a look at it, it'll tell you what does it do. represents an ASPX global events control. And I'm sorry, you know, generally we try to put as much info in here as possible. I'm gonna get with the team and improve this. But generally, what it does, and it's not incorrect what it says here, it represents a non-visual component that exposes a set of server and client events, allowing you to do custom logic. What does that actually mean? Well, you know what? Believe it or not, there's a really good explanation of it. Let me bring up this Code Central demo here. And it'll become clear as soon as we use it, right? But in this E3324 example where we're doing jQuery selectors and so forth, here it explains fairly well what's happening with the callbacks. I'm sorry, with the actually, hang on one second. I'm sorry, E3325 explains very well what's happening with the global events, right? So in essence, it's very much like jQuery's document ready, but it's really specific to DevExpress controls. And it is initialized after the HTML and DOM is done creating. So essentially, it's a way for us to say, hey, DevExpress controls, once the DOM has been done created, and those client-side API events and so forth that you've done to the DevExpress controls, I want to do something globally. And that's what this object allows us to do. So to add it, you'll find it under the Components tab. I'll double-click on it. And now we can set it up. So the first thing I want to do is give it a better name. So I'll just call it Global Events. And as you can see, it's got some client-side events that we can hook into, and we'll be doing that just in a minute. So the event that I want is controls initialized. So once the DevExpress controls have initialized, once they're all done, I want to show this pop-up. Well, actually, I want to make sure the pop-up is not shown right away, but it's shown after the session times out. So what I have to do is schedule it. So in the session timeout object I'll be creating, and I'll explain why I'm using an object to do this, a JavaScript object to do this. Well, mostly encapsulation. It makes sense. So I'm going to call it schedule pop-up, and this method will allow us to basically say, hey, once the session timeout is getting close to the 1 minute mark, hey, I want to show this pop-up. But before that, just do the countdown within itself. So, for example, if you stay within the site, every time you click away, that timer gets reset. So this is a good way to make sure that the event will be counted down. Okay, the other thing that we want to do is use a callback control, and we have this ASPX callback control that allows us to do just that. Now, you've seen that most DevExpress controls have this functionality built in. But if you ever wanted to use this functionality, this is a great way to do this. And this callback control allows us to do just that. So if you have a button and you say, hey, I want to make a callback, and you don't want to do something heavy like Microsoft Ajax update panel or something like that, this callback is a fantastic way to do that. So, and we also have a callback panel as well, if you want to enable functionality for controls that don't have it. In this case, I just want to simply make a callback from this page. So I'll rename this to keep alive helper. And that's exactly what it's going to do. It's going to help me keep this session alive if the user chooses to click OK. So I'm going to give it a client instance name as well, because I need to refer to this on the client side. And as I mentioned, I want to stay consistent by calling it client keep helper alive. And we'll be referring to this from a session object. So now we've essentially got the controls set up. Now let's go and make all the JavaScript happen. So the first thing is I want to add a script block. Excuse me. Let's add a script block here, and make sure we set the type equal to text JavaScript. Now, you can take a look. And like I said, if you're not fully comfortable with the JavaScript aspect of this, don't worry, because a lot of this is you can take it, and we've tested it, and it does work. But I'll be going through this and explaining this. So this session is a little bit slow to pop up here. All right, so let me try it a different way here. 3302. All right, so while that loads up, let me just go ahead and go back to and start here. Okay, so let me add a couple of other things to this. Now, in the timeout control, we also get a code behind, and I'm going to add a couple of items that I'm going to use because as you remember, I'm going to do a callback, and a callback obviously goes back to the server and comes back to the client. So I'm going to need a couple of items. The first is I need to know what happens when there's a timeout. So I'm going to make a string called timeout URL, which is empty. But this, because this is a user control, I'm going to let the user set this, which is why it's set to public. But this essentially defines where the user should go once the timeout has occurred. So it's a way for me to say, hey, here's the place you're going to redirect him to, and it could be something called like logged off or timed off or something like that. And then I need a pop-up show delay, and this has simply a getter on it, and it will, in milliseconds, which is 60,000, return whatever the session timeout is. So let me just define that here. And if you remember, we can just simply call this session object and call it timeout property. And I set it to -1 because for demonstration purposes, I set the timeout variable to 2, but really I wanted to count down from 1 minute. And finally, I need one other property that I'll be referencing on the client side. I'll make it protected so that the users who use this don't get access to it, but only this control has access to it. And I'll call it quoted timeout URL. And this too simply has a getter on it. And it does exactly what it says. So it gets a quoted version of the timeout URL. And what that means is it has quotes on it. So I'll explain that in just a second. So we've got resolve client URL, and we're going to call it timeout URL. And we'll do a little string manipulation here. We'll replace all of the current quotes in it. So this \quote allows us to say, I really meant a quote, because this is the sort of escape in the string. And I'll replace it with a \/ and a quote. So essentially we're saying just replace this with a adding a / to it, if that makes sense. So if not, it'll get a little bit clearer once we get on more of the JavaScript. So close this off and close off this method. Oops, I forgot something here. Don't need this guy. Okay. All right, so now I've set up the server side, and I've set up 3 variables that I'm going to be needing. And now we can get into the JavaScript. So the first thing is we're going to create an object called window. And a window refers on the client side of JavaScript to the window, right? So there's a few base JavaScript objects, and window happens to be one of the core ones. And I'm going to say window.sessionTimeout. Now this creates a object, and this is where you're going to see something. For you JavaScript experts, this won't be anything new. But if you're new to it, then JavaScript allows us to do, because it's a functional language, you can do some really interesting things with it. For example, what I'm creating here, I'm going to give you a better explanation of this entire thing at the end. But at first, if you're like me, you've probably done JavaScript and you use it to get it to do what you need. But it's good to learn some of these other aspects of JavaScript because you can do some much more powerful things, and some of these newer best practices with JavaScript are popping up. So what I'm creating here is actually a closure, and it's a way to do. Honestly, it's for myself, it's a little bit tough to explain closures, and I can recommend that our CTO Julian would be a great person to probably better explain that. But in essence, it's a way to encapsulate variables for reuse. And that's not a great explanation. So I think I'll explain it probably the way I like to do it. And so let's first define this. Okay, so what it is it's an anonymous function, right? That's being assigned to this variable called window.sessionTimeout. So then when the client side, any client side object on this page refers to the session timeout, they'll be able to access the items within it, and that's what we're going to define now. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to need a few variables in here, and the first one is we'll call it time left, and then we also need the pop-up timer, and finally a countdown timer. Now, the first thing I'm going to make is a anonymous function called stop timers. This allows you, well, allows us, I should say, to stop the timers, and all it's going to do is call the window.clear timeout and set it the variables that we define. So in this case, it'll be the pop-up timer, and I'm going to do this again for the countdown timer. So if I wanted to, this is something I could call from the client side. So you'll notice that we did that in a couple of places, and we'll be we'll be defining those. So let's go ahead and it's about 10:40, so I don't want to take too long, but I'll type a couple of more of these out because there's a bunch of JavaScript here. So if you will just bear with me here. The next thing we want to define is the update countdown. This too is an anonymous function that says, hey, there's a minimum, and we're going to define that by using a math function. Now, math is also another JavaScript object that we can use, and gives us some functions like floor, which gets us the bottom value of something. And in our case, this is the time left divided by 60, and that represents the minutes. And for seconds, we're simply going to say it's whatever time left is, and we're going to use the mod operator. Now, this percent is the mod operator is, I'll explain that in just a second. So what the mod operator does is, I don't want to get too geeky in this math stuff, but I always like this mod operator. But it gives us the remainder, essentially. So if it's, let's say, 5 divided by 2, it would be 4 point something. Well, that's what mod gives us. That's something. So in essence, it's a way to say, hey, whatever the time left is divided by 60, give me that value that's not the exact value that it divides into, but the remainder of it, and that represents the seconds. And finally, we're going to say if the seconds is less than 10, then we're just going to set the seconds, and this is for display purposes, to equal 0 plus the seconds. So essentially we're saying that, look, if the value gets down to less than 10 seconds, add a 0 in front of it so that it doesn't look weird, because it's going to look 11, 10, 9, and it's going to go to a single digit. So instead we're just going to add a 0 in front of it. But that's not the main thing what this function does. So what we want to do instead is, this is where we're going to be updating that span element we had created. So we need a reference to that span element. So we're going to say document dot get element by ID, and here we can reference countdown holder. Now if you remember, countdown holder is the span ID that we had made, and as I said, you want to make sure we call it exactly the same thing, and we did there. So here, countdown holder, we're going to get its inner HTML, and we're going to set it equal to minutes plus the seconds. So essentially, we're calculating the minutes and seconds left, and if it's less than if the seconds are less, we add a 0 to it, and essentially we're just updating the countdown timer. So finally, I want to make sure that if the time left is more than 0, I want to count it down. So essentially, we've calculated the time, we're displaying it, but we actually have to do the update part to the variable so we can keep track of it. And the way to do that is to decrement it. So I'm going to call it time left is equal to minus minus. Now, if you remember from your C# days, this minus minus essentially decrements the variable in front of it, takes its value, decrements it, and sets it back. So it's a great way, a short way to do that. And we'll set the countdown timer equal to window dot set timeout, and this will be set to update countdown and 1,000 seconds. So essentially, we have told the window object that here's the timeout object, and here's where it gets a little crazy. We're referencing our own function here. So essentially we're saying that, hey, window, this is how you're going to do a countdown timeout. It's going to happen once a second, and you're going to call this function to do the countdown. So if your mind is blown, don't worry. It's not as complicated as it probably looks. So essentially, in this and now, our countdown timer is counting it down as well. So this keeps track of the overall window countdown, time left, calculates time left of the actual session, and the pop-up timer keeps track of the pop-up timer. Now, if the item is not greater than 0, then we're going to redirect them by saying document.location is equal to quoted timeout URL. Now, quoted because we're here in JavaScript, right? We want to make sure that URL resolves properly, which is why we're using quoted URL. All right, so now we're done with this object. We can close it off. I'm sorry, we're done with that function update countdown, and we each have about 3 more. So they're not as complicated, don't worry. Now, the next one is to show the pop-up. And to do that, we'll call it show pop-up. And it too is an anonymous function. And it is going to set the time left equal to 60 seconds. So when the pop-up shows up, the first thing I want to say is, hey, listen, the pop-up showed up means you got 1 minute left. So I set it to 60 seconds. And then I'm going to start updating the countdown. So I call that function. And finally, the important bit, which is to call our client timeout pop-up window and call its show method. And that's it. Oops, get rid of that extra bracket there. And next, let's set the schedule pop-up. So here, we'll call this schedule pop-up. Create it as an anonymous function as well. And when we're scheduling the pop-up, the first thing we want to do is stop the timers. So we call our stop timers, and we're going to set the pop-up timer equal to the window and call it set timeout. And well, let me type this out first and then I'll explain it because it probably won't make sense as I'm typing this. So show pop-up and set this equal to pop-up show delay. Okay, so what's happening here is our pop-up timer is going to get updated because we've set the window set timeout to first display the pop-up, and the second variable of that set timeout, let's see if I can show you. Second variable is the number of seconds, and we use the pop-up show delay variable we had created here that says, okay, whatever the timeout is, multiplied by 60,000 milliseconds. So we needed milliseconds because that's what set timeout takes, milliseconds. Normally you can see we've done seconds or full minutes, but we want to be careful that some of these items have different types of things that they take in them. So that's essentially schedule pop-up. Now finally, let's define the keep alive, and this is where we're going to be referencing the callback. So send keep alive is also, surprise surprise, a anonymous function, and first thing it's going to do is also stop the timers, right? Because hey, I want to keep the session alive. And then I'm going to get rid of the client timeout pop-up window that we have and call it hide method, saying, hey, listen, I've clicked the OK button. I don't want this pop-up. Get rid of this pop-up and keep my session alive. And to keep the session alive, it's super easy. We're just going to call the client keep alive helper. This is the ASPX callback control, client ASPX callback control that we created, and we're going to say perform callback. And we're not actually, if you'll notice, we don't actually do anything on the callback. But what happens is when you do this, it creates a call back to the server, and that's all you need, because as soon as that happens, the session gets reset, because essentially IIS has gotten a request via that session, and it says, oh, hey, you're still there. Okay, I get it. I don't want you to, I don't want, or you don't want me to go away. You don't want me to end the session. So that's fine. I'll keep it alive. So, while we're not actually getting anything back from the server, this simple little call keeps our session alive. So that's great. All right. So, all right. Oh, by the way, as I've been doing this, I've not been careful with my JavaScript here. When defining these anonymous functions, we want to make sure that we dot our I's and cross our T's and all that. So here, the update countdown and some of these other ones don't have a very important piece, which is this semicolon. So at the end of these functions, make sure to add these, otherwise we'll have all sorts of headaches. Now, we've defined these functions so that we can call them from different parts of the code, and we've seen that. But this is still an overall anonymous function enclosure, right? So and what it's going to do, it's going to create a couple objects to return. Now, this one is going to seem a little bit tricky, so I'll explain this after I type it out. So schedule pop-up and send keep alive. All right, so we are done with that. All right, so we've closed off our function as well. Save it, and let's build it. Okay, so let me explain this JavaScript, because we are done with the majority of it, and I'll explain exactly what the thing that I've been promising you. Now, I think I got a fairly good explanation, because what I did is I went to our JavaScript expert on the ASP.NET team and I said, hey, what's a good way I can explain this? Because every time I try to explain it, to me, it doesn't sound so great. So essentially, what is happening in this object is that all the logic has been encapsulated in this function body. And the functions that are declared in it will not be visible from any public scope, meaning that nobody, unless they have access to this session timeout, will be able to see it. And so in this return statement, we're creating a new object, and it contains two public methods. So essentially, what happens is when we say return, this little bracket is allowing us to create a new object, and it has two methods on it, and those methods are aliases to methods in the private scope, which are declared in the private scope, which is schedule popup and keep alive. So basically what we're doing is saying, hey, listen, when session timeout gets called, I want to be able to expose schedule popup and send keep alive. And this is a very elegant, modern way to do this in JavaScript. And because I've encapsulated the functionality, but I've still exposed it to a way for it to get called. And so, this object has functions that are declared, and as a result, we have two live references to the function body scope, and we have a closure on the function body scope environment. So all the private methods will not be visible in the session timeout, but two of the public methods will be. I hope that makes sense. If you have any questions about it, feel free to ask, and I'll try to maybe better explain that. So the reason why we expose these two is because we reference them. We reference them here in the schedule pop-up, and I believe in send keep alive here. So when we click the OK button, that's meant to create the callback and keep it alive. And the global event says, hey, when everything's loaded up on this page, hey, schedule the pop-up. The pop-up should show up when it's ready to. Now, we have our timeout control, but where does it go, right? Whoops, I should not have an extra item on it there. Where should it go? So I'm going to put it on a page where that that I know where, you could put this in just about any of your pages, all of the pages, whatever. If you want to put it in the pages that you know the end users will probably be sitting on or so forth, right? So let's say the main default page or something like that. And to do that, I'm going to add a reference here. And let's go back. Now, the reference is so that I can reference the user control. And to do that, I'm going to add a little item at the top here, and I'm going to call reference. And we need to pass it a couple of things. Source is one of them. And this is going to point to timeout control.ascx. The tag name is the timeout control. And finally, I need to give it a tag prefix. And I'll call it UC1, but you could call it anything. You'll notice that generally our references usually use DX in front of them. So for example, here we register the assembly, and we call this DX. So by the way, I should apologize. I didn't mean to call it this reference. I meant to call it register. Okay. So we registered our assembly. I'm sorry, our timeout control, our specific user control, and now we can add it to our page, and we can do that by simply calling user control 1, timeout control, close it off, and it's important to give it a ID, and we'll call it timeout control 1, and make sure that the run at variable is set, and we set it to run at server. Now, one other important piece before I execute this is that, if you remember, we have this timeout URL. So we need to make sure that we set that timeout URL. So to do that, we actually need some place to redirect them. And to do that, I'm going to add a new item. And it's simply a web page, and I'll call it timeout page. Now in this timeout page, we'll add a little paragraph that says, sorry, your session has expired. Now, this timeout URL, because this is a user control, we set this property from the place where we use this control, which will be our default ASPX page is onload method. So here we can call, what do we call this? Timeout control 1 dot timeout URL is equal to, I believe it's tilde. Now this says go back to the root slash tilde slash timeout page dot ASPX. All right, so we've got everything set. I generally don't like to wait until the end to test this. Unfortunately, with all the JavaScript we had, there wasn't really an incremental way to keep testing this. So I'm going to trust that I've typed all the JavaScript correctly. If not, hey, we'll get the fun of trying to figure out what exactly didn't happen. So at this point, what we essentially have to do is wait. We have to wait 1 minute because, oops, let's put this over here. Now, because this is all done on the client side, we don't have to wait. Now, if I went to a different page or something like that, that's going to make another request to IIS and refresh it. So we don't want to do that. Instead, as I mentioned, and I think somebody in the webinar might have asked, what is this session? Is this available via Code Central? Hold on, let me make sure that we spot the pop-up if it comes up. Oops, that's not what I meant to do. Yeah, so the easiest way to get at it is copy the link address. Go to devexpress.com/example equals E3302. And, oh, okay, so here we go. As you noticed, 1 minute has went by. Now, if you remember, I allowed this this window to be draggable, and that allows me so that the end user doesn't have a chance. So as you can see, it's modal, so they can't go, hey, I want to click back and get away. I meant to do this. No, they have to address what's going on here. And the timeout is a little indicator that, hey, you have this amount of time. Now I'm going to let it expire to show you that, you know, if no action is taken, that they'll automatically get redirected. But if I clicked OK right now, it would do a callback and keep the session alive. And after another minute, this pop-up would come back again. So as I said, in this example, I used 1 minute, but you can use just about anything. So, oh, and the other thing is the look, and I'll talk about the look in just a second. So let's wait till our pop-up is done. So 3, 2, 1, and now we get redirected to timeoutpage.aspx. Now, this is a fantastic way because you have secured your end users. You give them confidence to let them know that, hey, not only have I built a site that's secure, but I'm trying to help you to make sure that you don't hurt yourself. This is the same thing that banks do, right? Banks say, hey, for your security, we're going to log you out. Because if you stay in the session, it's not safe because, hey, you know, somebody could sit down at your desk or somebody could, you know, log on. So log off when you're done with whatever you were doing. And this keeps sensitive information more safe. So, as I said, the goal of this wasn't really to get into, you know, whatever login procedure you're using, whether it's forms authentication or any other authentication you're using, this can work with any of that because this is really using JavaScript. Now, let's go back to this page. This is where the user control is. And this is where the countdown occurs. So I'm going to refresh this page, and now the countdown is going to occur for another minute. And this time I'm going to show you, and by the way, I know we're running a little bit over, Amanda, and I'm almost done. So this is the last thing I'm going to show is that when I click OK, it's going to keep the session alive. So as I mentioned, this example is available at devexpress.com/example equals E3302. Or if you go to search.devexpress.com, which is a fantastic site, and just do a search for like pop-up, session, timeout, or if you go to my blog, devexpress.com/Mehul, you can find it there as well. In fact, you know, it's the same shameless plug, but please subscribe to my blog. There's all sorts of good stuff that myself and the ASP.NET team try to bring you every week. So. Oh, and if you have any questions, you can always reach me at mharry@devexpress.com. Okay, so once again, our timeout has occurred, and now when I click OK, timeout's gone. I'm not redirected. Hey, I'm staying in the site. So as I mentioned, this is a fantastic way to show this items off. Oh, by the way, somebody named I want to say somebody named Scott said I love you, and Scott, I want to say I love you too. I thank each and every one of you that is here watching this, attending this, because clearly you guys are the smartest guys I've met all day today. But no, jokes aside, seriously, I think the stuff that we can add to our websites to improve usability, to make our end users' lives better so they don't have to think about those little things, you know, that's a complete win for us. So with that, I will stop, and Amanda, I'll give it back to you.
Great, thank you, Mehul. All right, everybody, we have a whole lineup of webinars that are posted throughout October. We have amazing guest presenters and, of course, our DevExpress product training. Check out all our webinars at devexpress.com/webinars. A quick peek into next week, Monday, August 29th, ASP.NET Scheduler 101 with Rachel Reese. Learn how to create, data bind, and manipulate the scheduler, everything you'll need to get started. And Tuesday, Ask the Frameworks team, XAF and XPO. This is your chance to get your questions answered and let us know what you think about what the Frameworks team has been up to. So join us at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time and ask away. If you missed anything from this webinar or you want to review any previous webinars or check out hundreds of online product tutorials, please visit us on the DevExpress channel at tv.devexpress.com. Again, thanks so much to Mehul. Thank you all for joining us, and thanks for choosing DevExpress.